of the church Bibles. Okay, so it starts with Hannah's vow. Good. There was a man from Ramathaim Zophim in the hill country of Ephraim. His name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, and an Ephraimite. He had two wives, the first named Hannah and the second Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah was childless. This man would go up from his town every year to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of armies at Shiloh, where Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were the Lord's priests. Whenever Elkanah offered a sacrifice, he always gave portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to each of her sons and daughters. But he gave a double portion to Hannah, for he loved her even though the Lord had kept her from conceiving. Her rival would taunt her severely just to provoke her, because the Lord had kept Hannah from conceiving. Year after year, when she went up to the Lord's house, her rival taunted her in this way. Hannah would weep and would not eat. "Hannah, why are you crying?" her husband Elkanah would ask. "Why won't you eat? Why are you troubled? Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" On one occasion, Hannah got up after they ate and drank at Shiloh. The priest Eli was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. Deeply hurt, Hannah prayed to the Lord and wept with many tears. Making a vow, she pleaded, "Lord of armies, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and not forget me, and give your servant a son. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will never be cut." While she continued praying in the Lord's presence, Eli watched her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, and though her lips were moving, her voice could not be heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, "How long are you going to be drunk? Get rid of your wine." "No, my lord," Hannah replied. "I'm a woman with a broken heart. I haven't had any wine or beer. I've been pouring out my heart before the Lord. Don't think of me as a wicked woman. I've been praying from the depth of my anguish and resentment." Eli responded, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant the request you've made of him." "May your servant find favor with you," she replied. Then Hannah went on her way. She ate and no longer looked despondent. So the second reading is over the page on chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, Hannah's triumphant prayer. Hannah prayed, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is lifted up by the Lord. My mouth boasts over my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you, and there's no rock like our God. Do not boast so proudly or let arrogant words come out of your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge and actions are weighed by him. The bows of the warriors are broken, but the feeble are clothed with strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for food, but those who are starving hunger no more. The woman who is childless gives birth to 7, but the woman with many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He sends some down to Sheol, and he raises others up. The Lord brings poverty and gives wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the trash heap. He seats them with noble men and gives them a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. He has set the world on them. He guards the steps of his faithful ones, but the wicked perish in darkness. For a person does not prevail by his own strength. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder in the heavens against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king. He will lift up the horn of his anointed. Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy served the Lord in the presence of the priest Eli.
I know it's a long reading, but it all works together. We have to, you've got to get the whole story. This prayer, this song, you can see is about hope, or a hope fulfilled. When we talk about hope, there's a forward-looking element to hope, isn't there? I hope for something to eventuate. I long for something. I yearn for something. And we see in that story, we see Hannah and her hope for a child. We see this. And so this is the theme that kind of came out. It tends to work itself out. And the theme was hope, because it's this forward-looking element of yearning for something, longing for something, and hope. So we're going to look at the hope of Israel, Hannah's hope, and then the hope of the world. The hope of Israel, Hannah's hope, hope of the world. So we start off big, kind of hope of Israel, and then we go in small at Hannah's hope, and then end up big again with the hope of the world. So the hope of Israel, there's a long story here. To be cut it short, is that God had come to Abraham. You'll know this, but he came to Abraham and he called Abraham out from the world. Because Abraham wasn't, it actually says in Genesis 12, he was from the land of Uz. He was a pagan. He was wasn't a God-fearer at all. He was called out from the world. Abraham came out from the world. God was to create a new people, a new community, a faithful community that would follow God. And God's people, God's people, 12 tribes and all that, had entered the promised land, and they were to settle there in the promised land. And what happened is, time and time again, God would raise up a new leader who would lead them and bring them forward, and that would be the hope. And we had this at the start of the service. The book of Judges is the book before 1 Samuel. There is a little book in between, but there's a reason why. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that. But the end of Judges, it says this: there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him. And see the little semicolon there? It's connect. There was no king in Israel, therefore there were a whole bunch of mini kings, thousands of mini kings, right? Everyone, and in the Hebrew, it's everyone did what was seemed right in their eyes by their own estimation, because there's no judge, there's no king. And the result, of course, is chaos. There was no hope. So as we get to the book of 1 Samuel, the hope of Israel, the idea that permeates all of this whole book that we'll be looking at through the whole series, and the question that's been asked again and again and again, is this the one? Is this leader the hope of Israel, the one who will bring justice, the one who will lead God's people, the one who will lead in justice and righteousness and truth and goodness? And so that's what Samuel's asking us. Is this the one? Is this the one who will lead? And various candidates throughout the book of 1 Samuel pop up as we go through the weeks. We'll see Eli's sons next week. There is Samuel. There are Samuel's sons. There is Saul. There is David. And that's the question. Is this the one? Who will lead God's people? Who will make them into the nation? This is the hope of Israel. This is the largest story as we get to 1 Samuel. And that's why as we read 1 Samuel 1:1, have a look, 233, do follow along, open it up, page 233, because if you don't follow along, you'll miss you just won't be able to follow it. It starts with, there was a man, and you think, is this the one? That's the idea. But the story we're going to focus on is a story of one who is on the edge, one who is on the outside, And this is God. He's going to be close to the brokenhearted, close to the outsider. And we're going to look at Hannah's hope. And so the question that is coming up for us, is this the one, the hope of Israel? The question for us, as we look at Hannah's hope, is where do we put our hope? And you'll notice here I've got here, in whom, in what. Where do we put our hope? In whom do we put our hope? What do we put our hope in? So the hope of Israel, is this the one leader? And let's have a look at Hannah's hope as we go into the story in detail. Hannah's hope, there's two parts to it. Hannah's false hope in verses 1 to 8, and Hannah's true hope in verses 9 to 18. Let's have a look. Hannah's false hope in verses 1 to 8. Hannah goes through immense pain and suffering, but in the process it shows her false hope. Have a look at verses 1 to 3, the backstory. There was a man, Elkanah, had two wives. One's called Peninnah and another Hannah. Peninnah had children, Hannah did not. Every year they would go up to worship at Shiloh. This is the context, verses 1 to 3 is the context of the whole chapter, really, of the story. That every year they're going to go up to worship. There's one who has children and there's one who doesn't, and there's Elkanah, the husband. Now, what would happen is there's a chain of events, and this is family function, dysfunction, however you want to put it. Have a look at verses 4 to 6, because there's a chain of events that happens. Notice the order, and there's a reason why the order is here. Look at what happens first, verse 4. Elkanah, when he was there, whenever he offered a sacrifice, the husband, Elkanah, would give portions of meat to his wife, Peninnah, and to the sons and daughters. But to Hannah, verse 5, he gave double because he loved her even though she couldn't conceive. And look at verse 6. Comes out to verse 5 for a reason. It's happening up because of verse 5. Her rival would taunt her severely. That's Peninnah would taunt Hannah severely to provoke her because the Lord had kept Hannah from conceiving. Now, every year they would go up and sacrifice. And every year Elkanah would publicly say, Hannah's the one I love more. Hannah is the one I give double portion. And you can see how then Peninnah, that would cause this reaction. Peninnah would taunt her severely and provoke her, it says there in verse 7. And you can imagine the more that Elkanah gave the double portion and showed his love to Hannah, the more that Peninnah would taunt Hannah and mock her and despise her and remind her that she's a failure. And this caused immense pain to Hannah, immense suffering. And in verse 6, it says there, she was provoked. And in some versions it says irritate. And the word there, that's a little bit of an understatement. I looked at the word in other verses in the Hebrew, and it almost always suggests a storm. It describes a storm like outside, and a wild storm. And what it's saying is that inside Hannah, she's experiencing this turmoil, this inner storm, a roaring agony. And maybe this is the first, I don't know if this is the first time in literature or a very early time where we see someone's inner life. And look at verse 7. Year after year, Hannah went up to the Lord's house. Her rival taunted her in this way. And look at what happens. Hannah would not eat, and she would weep. She is cast down. She is despondent. And we started with hope. This is someone at the bottom with hopelessness, with a feeling of no future. You see, Walter Brueggemann, an Old Testament scholar, has said basically in the ancient Near East, he's looked at a lot of old texts, and when they talk about barrenness, it's a metaphor essentially for no hope, no future. And here we have someone with a storm going on inside. And what's happening is we've got to try to understand the ancient society and how childbirth is tied up with someone, with a woman's status. This is what's going on in this ancient society. Now, I know you might hear that and you might say, that's awful and what a terrible culture. Just put that aside for a moment. Just try to understand what Hannah is going through and the culture that she's around and where it's saying, this is your worth, childbirth. This is where it's tied up in what you can do. Because the prospects of your family, imagine you're living there in thousands of years ago, this is how it works. The prospects of your family, your clan, your nation even, is connected to how many children you can produce. Why is that? Because consider, the more children you have, the more you can work the fields, right? You can't have a job where you're doing technology or moving numbers. That doesn't exist. You're doing jobs that are productive, right? It doesn't. So more children equals more productivity. This is what you need. Not only that, of course, you've got to have 10 children. You've got to have a lot because you might have 5 that end up surviving, or that's the reality of how it works. And then on top of that, of course, if you're getting to your old age, you need to have children because you need people that are going to look after you. From a family standpoint, from a military standpoint, from a nation standpoint, from a wealth standpoint, it's all wrapped up in there. This is how important it is. And the whole of society is telling her, reinforcing this to women, that your status is tied to childbearing. And it's saying this is where if you don't have this, you don't have any value. There's no worth. And you remember Rachel? She goes through a similar situation in Genesis, and Rachel says, these are the words, give me children. These are literally her words, give me a child or I die. And so Hannah had taken in the culture around her, as she had internalized what everybody is saying, and she tied that to her worth. She'd been invited to put her worth in childbearing and having a family and being reminded yearly, daily, she's nothing without it. And this was where her hope was. She'd placed her hope in this. You see, she'd put her trust in this. And as I said earlier, I'll just take a little segue here because I know we say, oh, what a terrible, we might be going, as I said earlier, a terrible culture, what an awful burden. And this is an ancient society. It's not like that for us today. And so we don't have to worry about this. Every culture has an oppressive expectation that they put on us. So we have other things. So just think, put it this way. Someone was reading something about ancient Near Eastern culture, and someone asked the question, what proportion of people in the ancient Near East kind of had eating disorders? And they said, the experts kind of know a little bit. They reckon probably not many at all, right? And you can understand why. They wouldn't have that problem. But we live in an individualistic culture that says our meaning and our worth and our status is dependent on things like money and wealth and what we can contribute and beauty. And we have our own issues that culture tells us this is what's important. And why do we have so much creams and youth things and things that make us look beautiful? And because we live in a particular culture. What I'm just trying to say is that every culture has some sort of oppressive thing. You see? So don't dismiss this and say, well, this is ancient culture. Lost power. Here we go. We're back on. Okay. We'll get to her true hope, Hannah's true hope. But I just want you to see a little segue, not a segue, but it's actually following the verses. I just want you to see that Hannah is offered another hope. Have a look at verse 8. Look at verse 8. Look at what her husband does. Verse 8, Hannah, why are you crying? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Oh, we just saw 10 children. Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? What he's saying is, childbirth, okay, you can't have that. Don't worry about that. Here's an alternative. How about me? Put your hope in me. Hannah's been offered by the culture, her identity, bearing children, bringing something, contributing that, building her life on that, what you have to offer. This is your pride and joy. And now Elkanah says, don't worry about that. Make me your pride and joy. Here's the other offering. Make me your hope. I love you. I give you a double portion. Isn't it enough? It's another false hope. Well, look at what happens in the story, because it seems like it might just be a little phrase that describes the situation, but verses 1 to 8 talk about Hannah's situation, where she finds herself. It shows up that false hope, where she's putting her trust. But look at verse 9. There's a turn in the story. There's a turn. The story's turning. Have a look, verse 9. What does it say? I hope I got the right verse. Can someone shout out, what does it say at the top of verse 9? On one occasion, and then what next? Hannah got up after they ate and drank and so on. On one occasion. In other words, one of these occasions where they go up the yearly sacrifices, right? Hannah got up. And now you say, okay, she got it from the table. Okay, biggie. But the idiom, the saying, when you get up and rise, the idea is she's taking action. She's going to do something. The point is, she'd be getting her hope in this childbearing thing. She had a false hope. There's hope here offered by Elkanah, her husband. Well, what about me? Aren't I better than 10 sons? And now she's been going up every year. She's been provoked. She's been weeping. She's been suffering. But now she's going to get up. She's going to do something about it. Something's going to change. She's going to get hope somewhere else. And where is she going to go? Keep reading. Verse 10. Deeply hurt, Hannah prayed to the Lord and wept with many tears, making a vow. She says, if you'll give me a son, I'll give him to you. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But look at verse 12. While she continued praying in the Lord's presence, Eli watched her mouth, and then he talks about her being drunk and so on. The conclusion, though, is, look at verse 15 and 16. Conclusion is, no, I'm a woman with a broken heart. I've been pouring out my heart before the Lord. And look at verse 16. I've been praying from the depth of my anguish and my resentment. Hannah got up, and what's she doing with all her hope that she had in childbearing, what's she doing? She's going to the Lord and she's bearing the very depths. Look what it says. From the depth of my anguish and my resentment. And she's taking it to the Lord. And what she's doing is she's recognizing that all her worth, all her value, all her hope is to be found in the Lord. And what a picture, pouring out to God. What an image. I'm taking that which is deepest in my life and I'm pouring it out to God. All of that rage and that anger and that resentment. And remember we talked about Psalms and we said Psalms aren't about just expressing stuff into the air, but neither are Psalms about stuffing down your feelings. Remember, it's about processing life under God. And here, this is what she's doing. She's going, I'm going to bring it to God. And what she's doing is she's recentering her trust, putting her hope, her delight, her treasure in the Lord. Hannah's hope was a false hope. She realized through her suffering, she realized where her hope had been put, and now she's coming to the Lord. But what happens? What's the outcome? Because we tend to think the story, I don't know, but when I first read the story and think about the story, what do we think? We think Hannah has this suffering, and then she prays to God in the temple, and then she gets a child. We know how the story goes. And so now she's happy because she's got a child. Is that what happens? Look, she pours out her heart, depths of anguish and resentment, and then look at the end of verse 18. Look at this. After the blessing with Eli and so on, then Hannah went on her way. What does it say at the end of verse 18? She ate and she was no longer despondent. Has she got the child? No. Has the prayer been answered? We know, but she doesn't know. What it's saying is she has her hope now placed in the Lord. She now has her hope not in the cultural system, in what the culture was saying, this is what you have to do to have value. This is where you're going to get your value. Not from a husband who was saying, you can get value in me. No. And now she's placed her hope in the Lord. And whether she gets the child or not, she's no longer despondent. She is in the Lord. Hannah's hope. Now, 3 very brief things about this I think we need to ask before we finish with the hope for the world. And that is this question. What is Hannah's hope? 3 things about Hannah's hope and this little story about Hannah. The question is, of course, firstly, where do we put our hope? In what do we put our hope? In whom do we put our hope? We have to understand that we can put our hope in wealth, in people, in things, but in the end, it'll be disappointing. And you can imagine the suffering. The other little note is you can imagine the suffering that Hannah is going through when she's going through that suffering. But we know the suffering was all for her to be awakened to the false hope, wasn't it? It was all about showing her where her real treasure is. So what does that say about some of the suffering that we might be going through? Where do we put our trust? In whom do we hope? Some of our deepest disappointments in life come because we look to get certain things which we can only get from God. We look for it in people or in others, whether it's our beauty or our significant other. We look to find hope in them. The second thing, very briefly, so where do we put our hope? Second thing, very briefly, is what does this say, little Hannah's hope? What does it say about our prayer life? Remember, we talked about the Psalms, and Hannah is going through this pain. She could stuff down her feelings. Maybe she did that year after year. Other times she could just vent to her friends about what's going on. But what does she do? Of course, she gets up. She takes it to the Lord. What does it say about us and our life and what parts of our life we need to bring before God? And thirdly, Hannah makes a vow in verse 11. Now, what sort of vow is this? She makes a Nazirite vow. Now, that's kind of the shaving of the head, and the point is, to become a priest, you have to be born into it. The Nazirite vow is the way to get around that, the way to become a priest and not be born into it. But it's serious, like super serious. But the point is this. I don't know if you realize, and maybe you read this and you go, oh, she's talking about give me something and I'll give you something back, God. But consider that she yearned for this child. She wanted this child. She longed for this child. And then she's praying, well, I'll give him away. She won't see the child beyond 3 or 4. Once it's weaned, she's not going to see the child. That's it. And what's happening here? At the start, we started with the hope of Israel. I remember we were asking, who is the one? Is this the one? What's happening is Hannah is saying, because she centered her hope and delight in God, she's saying, at the bottom of my heart, all my life I've asked for this child and wanted this child. But now she's saying, if I get this child, I'm just going to build my life on this child, or I'm going to build my life on my husband, and people are going to walk around and say, look at what you've done, and isn't the child great, and so on and so on. But she realizes, I have to build my life on God and his mission. And she wants to contribute to God's mission, and she's got her trust and her hope centered on God. She is free to serve him. And she's even saying, now that thing that I thought was most worthy, I'm going to give to you, God. What does that teach us about using our talents, treasures, time, our delights, our hope for God? Hannah's hope, false hope, was revealed. She found true hope in the Lord. It shows us it asks us that question, where is our hope? How do we process life under God? And how do we serve God? But of course, it doesn't end there, because she sings a song. And we sang, rejoice, Mike, the King of heaven. Rejoice, my soul, the King of heaven. Have a look at verse 3. She sings this song to God, my heart rejoices in the Lord. And notice she's singing about her rejoicing in the Lord and her getting joy and delight in the Lord. She's not saying about how she's got a son now. She's talking about her heart rejoices in the Lord. And there's the whole song about the lifting up and the taking down. And it would be good to go through it, but we just haven't got the time to go through it all. Have a look at the end, because this bit we can skip over. But look at what it says at the end of this song. He's talking about God, of course. God, the one who raises up, who takes down, who gives the poor rich, who takes down the rich. It's the upside down thing. But look at what it says at the end. God will give power to his king. He will lift up the horn of the anointed. Anointed means Messiah. This prayer is all about God's chosen one, the one who would come. Remember the question? Is this the one? The king. And then the very next verse, Elkanah went home and the boy served under the priest Eli. And we're asking, is this the one? Hannah's got her delight in God, and she's got all her purposes caught up in service to God, and she's even praying about God and his kingdom, his hope, the hope of Israel, power to the king, the one who was anointed. Well, we know Samuel, as we read through, we will know that Samuel won't be the one. And it won't be Saul. It won't even be David, as good a king as he is. Because there are many, in the Old Testament, there are many children who are born from barrenness. There's Isaac. If you remember Rachel, who said, give me children or I die, and she has Isaac. There is Samson from the book of Judges. There's Samuel. And there's John the Baptist. Do you remember Elizabeth, who couldn't have a child? And all of these were mini saviours. And of course, all of these barren births were pointing to a greater, more impossible birth of one who would have an even more impossible birth, and one who would begin to sing a song. I don't know if you know, but you know about Jesus, of course, but have you thought about the virgin birth is not so much about, did it happen or did it not? It's more about how impossible it is, you see? And this one, Mary, sings a song. And the song is almost identical to Hannah. When Mary begins to sing, she says, "My spirit rejoices in God, my Saviour. He's filled the hungry with good things. He's sent the rich away. He's brought down rulers from their throne, lifted up the humble." It's the same song. Why does she sing like Hannah? Because Mary's the ultimate Hannah. And Jesus is the ultimate Saviour, the ultimate judge, the ultimate Saul, Samuel, David, the one who we listen to. Because Samson and Samuel and David will save people politically, economically, in terms of a kingdom on earth. But of course, the ultimate Saviour, Mary's son, will lose all his glory, all his power, all his life to save us from sin and from death itself. And when Jesus is on the cross, he pours out his soul. Listen to Isaiah. He quoted Psalm 22 where it says, "I poured out my life like water." Listen to Isaiah 53:12. Isaiah 53:12, "He poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors." Jesus, the hope of the world, the one who was numbered with the sinners, he who knew no sin took on our sin so that we could become the righteousness of God, that we could know him. This one who rules in righteousness and truth and justice, the mighty King, the hope of the world. Jesus is the one, as we go through this book, and we're going to come up with these questions about who we listen to. Jesus is the one who we listen and we follow. The one in whom we, like Hannah, we serve. The one in whom we lay down our lives. The one in whom we trust. The one who has loved us beyond measure, the King.